floorplan.dwg file, and I've left it in the same state as it was at the end of the last video, where we created our rectangular table with the circular insert, like so. What I'd like to do is just roll back on the wheel a few notches and just zoom out a bit, and then we're going to pan across and go into this space here in the floor plan. So zoom in a bit, make sure it's nice and centralized using pan like that. Ideally, if you can pan and zoom so that you can see your other table that you created in the previous video, that would be very useful, because you can use that as a visual reference. So we're going to take a look now at polar tracking and also ortho in AutoCAD. Ortho stands for orthogonal, which means it basically ties you into vertical and horizontal sort of kind of planes. You'll see how that all works when we go through it in a moment. What I'd like you to do though is just make sure that you've still got the same settings down on your status bar at the moment. So you should have your object snaps on from the previous video, your auto snap, object snap tracking, and make sure your polar tracking is on, because we're going to use that directly this time. So click on the little fly out there, make sure it's set to 90 degrees as per the previous video. Now we're going to create the same size table, but just use the line command this time. In fact, we could use the polyline command. It doesn't matter. Either one will give the same result. The only difference is when you close the polyline, it will be a closed whole object like this one here. Can you see that's a polyline? If I drew that with 4 lines, it would be 4 lines sharing common vertices. So you can either do this using the line command here in the draw panel, or if you want it to be a closed boundary, such as a rectangle, you'd use polyline. Ideally, you should really use polylines as a preference, so I'm going to go with polyline there, like so, and come into the drawing area. Now, this is where I utilize my polar tracking and my direct distance entry. So I'm going to pick a point in this area. Again, it doesn't matter which point, you don't have to be specific. So just left click somewhere in the space, like so. There you go, and there's my polyline starting, like so. Now as I drag horizontally to the right, you'll notice my polar tracking kicking in. Now your polar tracking is really important, and I'll go into the polar tracking settings in this video as well, because at the moment it's working with basically angle increments of 90 degrees. So if you think about it, 360 degrees in a circle, that means I've basically got north, south, east and west preset in my polar tracking. Now, as long as that polar tracking line is displayed, that green dashed line, you can just drag along it and type in a distance directly. That's your direct distance entry. So I can type in 3500 like that and just press enter. Done. That's drawn at that polar tracking angle. If I now move the mouse vertically upwards, can you see I get a green vertical polar tracking line? And you can see that's at 90 degrees. The dynamic input display has given me a 90 degrees there. I want that to be 2000, so it'll be the same size as the previous table from the previous video. I just press enter, and there's my line at that polar tracking angle. Come across here to the left now, move the mouse to the left, and you can see the polar tracking line going off to the left. That's at 180 degrees, the next increment along, 90 degree increment. And again, I'm going to type in 3500, press enter. No coordinates needed, you'll notice. It's quick and easy with the direct distance entry. Now the good thing is, line command or polyline command, I can now just right click and select close on the shortcut menu, and that closes it back to where we started. Now because I use the polyline command, if I hover over that, you can see now AutoCAD is telling me it's a closed polyline. It's not a group of 4 lines. If I'd used the line command and hovered over that top line there of the rectangle, it would just tell me that that's a line, and it would only highlight the top line. Try and get into the habit, if you've got geometrical shapes, use the polyline command. It gives you a little bit more scope for manipulation. It also keeps your file size down, because that's one object instead of 4 lines creating the table, so to speak. Now, what we're going to take a look at next is how we can do the same thing, but using ortho. Now, you can't use polar and ortho at the same time. If I use ortho, polar turns off. If I use polar, ortho is turned off. So what I'd like you to do is select the polyline you've just drawn. Right click, and on the shortcut menu, click on erase. So we're going to draw the same polyline, all 4 lines, it's up to you, so that we can see how ortho works. But to do that, I've got to come down to the status bar and turn ortho on here. There you go, ortho mode. It's off at the moment, but notice when I switch it on, polar turns off, like so. So let's draw our table again. So we're going to go back to the polyline command, into the drawing area, left click for the first point. Now watch what happens with ortho on as I drag. I cannot go up and down. I can only go left and right and up and down from the point selected. Can you see that? So if I drag to the right, I can't go up and down. So direct distance entry, 3500, enter. I know that's horizontal because I've got ortho on. I can only go horizontally or vertically. So if I now come up vertically, notice there's no polar tracking because it's off. If I come up there and type in 2000, this is obviously tying me down now to vertical and horizontal. I can't go any other direction. So I drag that to the left, and again 3500, and then a right click and a close for the polyline. I've got exactly the same polyline. Hover over that, can you see? It's a closed polyline, 3500 by 2000. So there's two different ways of getting exactly the same result. Now the one thing I would suggest here is, obviously ortho, you are restrained. You are literally constrained to the vertical and horizontal axes. That's it, X and Y axes. But with the polar tracking, you can utilize other angles of different values. So my suggestion is, unless you only want to draw horizontal or vertical lines, use polar tracking. So we come down to the status bar, there's polar tracking, click on it, you'll notice ortho turns off, polar goes on. Now if you right click over the polar tracking icon and go to tracking settings, click on tracking settings, it opens the drafting settings dialog in the polar tracking tab. Polar tracking is obviously on. You see the box is ticked there, so the checkbox is ticked. And the increment angle is based on what we set previously, the 90 degrees. So I can set those in the drop down as well. There's the standard angle increments, like so. I can add additional angles in this box here by clicking on new if I want to. So if I've got some randomly weird angle like 67 degrees that I want to draw at, I can click on new and add my 67 degrees like that. Press enter, and now when I use polar tracking, when I hit that 67 degrees, you'll see a polar tracking line. Let me show you what I mean. I'll click on OK. I'll just draw a line now quickly, click on the line command, come off of this endpoint snap, and as I drag upwards, there's the 0 degrees. As I come up a little bit more, you'll start to see the angle change on the dynamic input. There you go, see the 67 kick in? So there's 67, but it's only an increment of that one angle value. It's not multiple increments of 67 degrees. And then there's the 90 degrees, like that. I'll just hit escape to cancel the line command. I'll right click on polar again, and there you go, there's my individual 67 there, like so. I'll go to tracking settings. If I don't want it anymore, I can select it like that, right click, I can delete it, and you'll notice I tried to right click there. You can't right click on these, there's the delete option right there. Sometimes in dialogues you can right click over values, sometimes you can't. Right click there, doesn't work, so you just delete it like that and the additional angle disappears. Click on OK, and when you click on your fly out now, all you've got is your default ones there, like so. Now if I right click on that, you'll notice that the 67 has gone as well when I right click too. So I'll just hit escape a couple of times there, and again you'll notice you can't escape. You have got to click on the little button there, like so, on that little fly out arrow. But you can see there how polar tracking and ortho can work well together and also individually. I would say the majority of the time though, utilize your polar tracking, but if you are constrained to horizontal and vertical for a specific project, put your ortho on.